Kia ora. Hi, my name is Ingrid and I'm a PhD student at the University of Waikato in the final year of my PhD, and my research area is disability pride. So I was invited to talk as part of the Disability Pride Week. So I'm going to talk today about what disability pride means to me and why I think it is so important, because I do believe that it is absolutely crucial if we're going to challenge disability oppression. So the presentation today is split into two parts. In the first part, I'm going to give you some background about where we are today, and I'm going to tell you a story about inclusive education, because I think that that helps to explain my thinking about what the problem is that we're facing. And then in the second part of the presentation, I'm going to talk about disability pride and why I think it's so important for shifting those problems based on what we've learned from past successful rights movements. So first of all, some background. The reason that I enrolled to do a PhD is because I'd been working in the disability support sector for over 10 years, doing lots of different kinds of jobs. And after a while, I looked around me and I started to realize that while lots of us seem to be working really hard to help disabled people, nothing ever really seemed to be getting any better. Like, we were making a positive difference to individuals' lives most of the time, but yet no matter what we did, more people would come along behind those people and they'd have the same problems as the people before them. So while we were helping individuals, the bigger picture just wasn't changing. And I thought to myself, like, man, there's got to be a better way to do things. We obviously need to do something different if we want things to change from where they are now. And one of the really important lessons I've learnt doing a PhD is that we're so used to the world being the way it is that most of us don't even recognise disability oppression as a thing. There's this old joke where a fish is swimming down the river and they see a dog on the bank, and the dog says, "How's the water?" And the fish goes, "What's water?" I know it's not a very good joke, but I think that disability oppression is a bit like that. I think it's in the water around us all the time, and we're so used to it just being the way the world is that we think, well, that's just how things are. So I've learned that it's actually really important to talk about what it is that I'm talking about when I say I'm talking about disability oppression. So I'm talking about, for instance, how disabled people have some of the lowest employment rates in the country, particularly if you have a learning or intellectual disability. Based on some information that came out from Statistics New Zealand earlier this year, disabled people earn on average $200 less per week than non-disabled people. And with the minimum wage exemption permit still being legal in New Zealand, you can pay a disabled person quite literally anything you like. In 2014, half of all people on the permit earned less than $3 an hour. This was at the time when minimum wage in New Zealand was $14.75. So, unsurprisingly then, disabled people tend to live in poverty, but are also more likely to be victims of abuse and bullying, are more likely to be excluded from the general education system, are more likely to be socially isolated, are underrepresented politically and in the media, and have poorer health and lower life expectancy than the general population. I'm going to put my references up on the second to final slide, and then on the final slide I'll put my contact details. So if you want any of the references for any of this information, feel free to contact me and I'm happy to share anything. So essentially this was the problem that I started my PhD with. Why is it that despite all of our hard work over the past few decades, these statistics just aren't shifting very far? In the support sector, we can make a positive difference to individual people's lives, but that bigger picture just isn't really changing. There's this quote I really like from a woman called Karen Berard, who's the theorist that I'm using, and she says, "The world and its possibilities for becoming are remade with each moment." Berard shows us that our world and disability oppression aren't stable, solid and fixed phenomena, but are actually constantly being remade anew. I like to use the metaphor of a river to help explain this idea, because I think that even though we think the river, I got this idea from Bronwyn Davies as well, I should acknowledge that. I think even though we think the river is always the same, like it's in the same place and it seems like it's kind of the same thing, there's actually a constant flow of new water running through the river. And in the same way, every moment we have is a new moment and time is never the same again. And in the case of the Waikato River in the photo on the slide, which is really polluted, there's actually a constant flow of fresh water running through the river that is continuously being polluted. Using this river as a metaphor for our world, I see that While each new moment we have presents an opportunity for remaking the world in a new and more positive direction, something is happening that is continuously saturating our moments with disability oppression. And now I'm going to use this river metaphor to tell you a little story about some of what I've learned and how disability pride connects in with all of this stuff. So, I want you to imagine a boat coming down the river. So I've just got a boat on the slide here. And this boat is our standard factory-made one-size-fits-all classroom approach to education. So on the boat, we've got a teacher at the helm and spaces for 30 children. Now, at the beginning of the year, 30 kids all line up to get onto the boat, and within this group of children, we have a child with Down syndrome. So let's call her Marama. So I've just put up a picture of a child in the boat. So Marama tries to get onto the boat, but then we find, it's not really quite working for her. So what do? We modify the boat. We get a teacher aide to hop on board a couple of hours per week, and we get in some boat modification specialists who put in an individualized plan. And then Marama and the teacher aide and the teacher and Marama's parents all work really hard to make it so that Marama is included in the classroom. And this is what we usually call inclusion. But what happens next year when Marama gets off the first boat and onto the next classroom boat? So we've got on the slide here the same river, and there's Marama in the boat, like on the previous slide, and there's lots of other boats that look exactly the same as the first boat. And this is what we're going to find. Marama hops off the first classroom boat that she's on, and she gets onto another classroom boat, but it's another one-size-fits-all, and it has to be modified again. And on and on and on this goes for every year that Marama is at school. The point of this story is that when we talk about inclusion, what we're usually talking about is modifying the boat so that we can make it fit for the person that we're trying to include. When I talked earlier about how so many of us were working so hard to make things better and yet nothing ever really seemed to change, well, this is what I was talking about. Because it doesn't matter how hard we try or how good we get at modifying these boats, the next boat that comes along is going to be another one-size-fits-all. We get better at learning how to modify boats, but the boats never stop needing to be modified. The bigger picture just isn't changing. My thinking about this is really shaped by a quote from Jan Wormsley, who said, "Only the excluded need inclusive research." Now, if we take out the word research and supplement it for, say, education, workplaces, or society, we have something like, "Only the excluded need inclusive societies." The pivotal word for me here is the word excluded, and I think this points to the heart of our problem. Instead of focusing on inclusion, we need to focus on exclusion, because we will never have inclusion into a system which, through its very design, continually causes exclusion. And when we think about the problem this way, our focus of attention shifts. Instead of looking at what's right here in front of us, so we've got Marama on the boat on the river, and asking how can we include Marama or other disabled people into society, our attention shifts upriver to a more macro level view. So if we use macro level or bigger picture view. And if we use Karen Barrad's quote that the world and its possibilities for becoming are remade with each moment, then we start thinking in terms of, well, what's happening that's causing our boats or our classrooms to be designed in such a way that they inherently exclude Marama as well as so many other children? Or, in other words, what is happening that is causing exclusion and disability oppression in the first place, and how do we change this? One of the key things that I think is causing exclusion is ableism. So ableism is a bit like the terms racism or sexism, but for disability. Ableism is the belief that there's such thing as a normal, ideal person, that we should all be that person, and that to be other than that is a problem. So on this slide, on the left-hand side, I've got a stick figure female that's like what you often see on female bathroom doors, and it says normal. So this is the ideal to which we're all meant to strive. And then on the right-hand side, I've got the disability image, so that's what you often see on mobility parks or accessible toilets, and that's our disabled person. And I find the best way to explain ableism is by using these resources. So I've got in my hand a large piece of paper that says disabled on it, and a smaller piece of paper that says normal on it, and a pipe cleaner, which is made into a circle. So ableism is a binary. We've split the world into two categories: people who have disabilities, the big piece of paper, and people who don't have disabilities, the little piece of paper. And this pipe cleaner represents society. So society is shaped the way that it is because we assume that everyone is meant to be like this normal person. So this person fits into society really well. They get a job, they can pass all the tests in school, they have friends, everything seems to work fine. But when we have a disabled person come along and they can't fit in, so this is marama not being able to pass the tests at school or not being able to find a job, for instance, we think, oh, there's something wrong with this person rather than with the shape of our society and how it's built in such a way that it's excluding people. Sorry, I should also note that it's important to say when I talk about normal and ideal person, I'm saying it with like quotation marks, so like normal. This ideal norm is a made-up idea that I don't think any of us ever really achieve, and I also don't think that it's a very useful idea. So when I say normal or ideal, please don't take it to mean that I actually mean that that's what we should be going for. And when we think about how this ableist idea relates to education, the one-size-fits-all classroom, what we have is the boat that we had on the slide earlier, built for this ideal normal child. So now we've got lots of those ideal normal people stacked along the boat. We assume that every child will learn how to paddle down the river at about the same speed and in about the same way. So this is what national standards is all about, checking how each child does in relation to the ideal norm. This worked great for me in school because I was usually judged to be above average, and I felt really good about myself for being above average. But what's going to happen when we make marama do the tests? We find out that marama is failing, and then we think that there's something wrong with her just for being who she is. Or we blame the teacher or the parents or the teacher aide for not doing their job well enough because we've made a problem out of the fact that marama isn't meeting our ideal norm. And then, after marama finishes high school, she decides she wants to get a job. So we start looking for the job boats on the river. So now I've got that river picture back again, and I've got lots of different models of boat coming down the river. Except that we find again, even though there are heaps of different models of boat on the river, they're all built for the ableist norm. So every spot on every boat is built assuming that the person rowing will have a certain base level of skill. And like so many other people with a learning disability, marama finds that there aren't any vacancies that she can fill on any of the boats. So then we hire an employment consultant to look for boats with vacancies and see if it isn't possible to modify one of these boats so that marama can work for the lowest possible wages, of course, if she is lucky enough to get a job. This is not a simple problem with a simple solution. I'm sorry to tell you that I don't have any easy fix answers for you today. Like the fish not realizing that they are surrounded by water, this ableism is a very complex problem which is woven through the very fabric of our society. This ableist thinking permeates so much of how we think and what we do, and we're only just starting to chip the tip of the iceberg in understanding this. This ableist thinking affects not only our job market and our classroom design, but also the way we've built our houses, assuming that everyone can walk, and the way that we've built our society around the assumption that everyone can read and pick up social cues, and so much more. So then, how do we change this? How do we challenge a world that is continuously remade in a way that it excludes disabled people? Obviously what we're doing now isn't working because despite our hardest efforts, those boats just keep coming down the river, designed in a way that excludes disabled people. And those statistics that I mentioned earlier aren't shifting very far. Well, I have an idea, a starting point for how we can start to change things. And this idea is based on what we've learned from past successful rights movements, such as the civil rights movement and the gay and lesbian rights movement. And there are two key lessons that I want to highlight today. So the first key lesson is about the strength of a collective. So now I've got a small piece of string in my hand. And I want you to imagine that this string is a single voice floating down the river. So this is one person on their own battling against the currents of ableism, which are shaping our boats. It's very easy to break this string. Now I've got the same material, but it's been woven into a little bit of a rope. Like, I can't break it. It's that much stronger. And this is the strength of a collective. Voices like this, when you get a whole bunch of voices twined together, it suddenly becomes a lot stronger. There's real strength in numbers. As single individuals, we can make a difference, but the only way that we will have the strength that we need to challenge the ways in which society continually excludes disabled people is, such as the ways that our jobs and classroom boats are designed, is with a strong collective voice demanding change. This isn't a new concept to us here in New Zealand. We fought for a nuclear-free Aotearoa in the 80s, with a strong collective voice, and we were the first country in the world to gain votes for women based on a strong collective campaign from women across the country. When individuals who are passionate about an issue come together and develop their own collective voice, what once seemed impossible suddenly becomes reality. And the second key lesson that we can learn from past successful rights movements is about pride. In order to be a collective, you have to see yourselves as a collective. We have to be able to come together like the strands in this rope thing. And this can't happen as long as people are shying away from disability, because they're rejecting the very identity that is necessary for a collective to form. Now, I get that this idea will make some people uncomfortable. I mean, what does someone in a wheelchair have in common with someone who has Down syndrome or is blind or has autism? The only thing that those groups of people really have in common is that they've been placed in the disabled category of the ableist binary. So I've got that ableism binary up on the screen again, where there's a normal person on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side we've got the disabled person, and it's got the wheelchair user, the Down syndrome, person with Down syndrome, the blind person, and the autistic person all grouped into one category. So the only thing these people have in common is that they've been grouped into that category, and that they live in the world that is the consequences of being designed around the ableist norm. I think it's important to recognise that the oppression and the exclusion that disabled people face is actually because of their disability, because we have designed a world assuming that everyone should be like the ableist normal person. So then when I say pride, what do I actually mean by it? Well, it's both an emotion, so a way of feeling about ourselves and about disability, as well as an intellectual concept. So I like to use the definition from Ian Parsons, who says that pride is refusing to accept the values of society, which says with its words, its attitudes, and its values, that some human identities are less valuable than others. But I also think that more than just rejecting those values which say that a disability identity is a less worthwhile identity, it's about demonstrating the values that society should take on moving forward. Disability pride is about the acceptance and the celebration of difference. It's about flipping around those negative ideas about disability and reclaiming it as a valuable part of humanity. And one absolutely crucial part about pride is that it has to be about pride and disability because of disability and not in spite of disability. So at the moment we talk a lot about how really disabled people are just the same as everyone else, or how we should focus on the abilities of disabled people. And I think this is one of those key forces which is continuously shaping the design of those boats that I talked about earlier. Because when we say that, we're actually playing into the idea that a disability identity is a less valuable human identity. As Ian Parsons says, the women's movement does not primarily emphasise the maleness of women. The Aboriginal movement does not primarily emphasise the whiteness of Aborigines. The gay and lesbian movement does not primarily emphasise the heterosexualness of gay men and lesbians. But the disability movement does very much emphasise the ableness of people with disabilities. So instead of challenging those values, which say that a disability identity is less worthwhile, such as the ideas that we should all be independent and not needing support from other people or the economy, we've been measuring ourselves up against those values. We've been asserting everyone's equal worth by saying things like, focus on the ability, not the disability, and we say to focus on the common humanity of people, that we are all people first, before a disability. And I get why you would do that in a world in which disability is so deeply devalued. But I think what we're saying when we say disabled people are just the same as everyone else is we're drawing on that ableist binary, and we're saying that disabled people are just like the ideal norm of ableism. And I think when we say that, what we're actually talking about is people having equal rights and opportunities. But disability pride isn't about saying, hey, if you ignore all the ways in which we are different, we are really the same and therefore we should have equal rights. It's about saying that who we are with our differences and disabilities is valuable, is valid and worthwhile, and we should all have equal rights. In his book, Cripples, Coons, Fags and Femmes, which I've got a picture of on the slide, and I highly recommend this book, Ian Parsons argues that it's only when people come to believe that the devalued part of their identity is crucial to their worth that things will begin to change. So by this I mean that when women began to believe that their womanhood was crucial to their worth and value, and when disabled people begin to believe that their disabilities are crucial to their worth and value, that things will start to change. This is, as Parsons says, a radical way to respond to oppression, because it takes the very basis of oppression, turns it around, and uses it as the basis for pride. And then crucially, pride can begin to be transformed into the power we need to challenge disability oppression when the people who share that pride organise together. An identity of pride which has the strength of this rope to challenge the ways in which disabled people are continually excluded from society can only emerge collectively. Now, this doesn't mean that the collective voice and identity needs to be one message that's agreed upon by everyone. It's important that we allow a different politics and values and ideas to flourish. No human rights movement is in any way a single entity with a single voice and a single identity. It's also really important that we don't deny the hard parts of disability, because, and that includes the real mental, physical and emotional challenges that come with it, because we don't do ourselves any favours when we pretend that that stuff isn't real and an important part of our experience. So then, how do we get to disability pride? To be honest, I don't really have the answer to this, but I do have some ideas to start with. Again, I think we can look to the other successful human rights movements and see that what worked for them was when they came together as a community and developed their own voice with their own sense of identity of pride. As someone who doesn't currently have a disability, I don't think that I am well placed to do this, although I am happy to support as an ally. But here are some of the ideas that I do have. Look for the ways in which disability enriches our lives and share those stories together. So I have a friend, Jack. He's 20 now, and I've known him since he was 6, and he has a profound disability. Jack helps me to see wonder in the world. He helps me to appreciate fart noises and escalator rides and the background music in stores and all those tiny little things that normally pass most of us by, but are actually what make life rich. And this wouldn't happen if Jack didn't have a disability. Jack's disability is an important part of what makes him who he is, and I think that this has deeply enriched my life. Look at how the challenges you have faced in your life have led to creativity, innovation, and a more rich existence. I can personally attest to how much richer my own life is after having depression helped me to realise my values and passions and connected me with other people and social movements with similar values and passions. I'm not sure that I would be doing this research today if I didn't have that experience. Speak out against language which focuses on the common humanity of disabled people and tell people what you would prefer instead. So there's this quote I really like from a blog by Leanne Pride in which she states, "You see, I am certainly no less human because I was born with unique neurology, so the need to emphasise my humanity seems wildly redundant." Think of disability as an opportunity to rethink our ideas about ideal humans and how we've developed the world. So that's both in terms of things like the way we've designed our houses and our transport systems, but also the way we've designed our social structures around communities and those sorts of things. Disability is an opportunity to rethink how we can design a world that works for everyone. Remember that it's not about having a single unified voice, and it's important not to deny the hard parts of disability. You might actually disagree with some of the stuff that I've been sharing today, and that's cool. Or a friend told me the other day that actually a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about these ideas apply to her for reasons other than disability. And that can be quite emotional for people, and that's okay too. I would encourage you to share your thoughts with others, and with me if you would like, because my last point is to tell these stories, share them together. Pride needs to be collective. It's about developing a collective narrative about what disability is and how it enriches our lives and the world. And just to finish, I want to leave you with one of my favourite quotes from Parsons. He says, "Prejudice thrives on keeping people down. You can't discriminate against someone and oppress them if they are as powerful as you are, and so you have to stop them from attaining power. And one way to keep them from attaining power is to keep them believing that they are not worthy of it, or are not capable of seizing it. But once powerless people begin to believe in themselves, their worth, and their inherent right to a share of the power, they begin to muster both the resources and the strategies to fight the prejudice that they are experiencing." Thank you.